tonight's Memories, Meadows Valley Memories. Thank you for coming. We have early logging will be our subject today or tonight, and these distinguished gentlemen sitting around this table are tonight's panelists. We have Barney Conner, Warren Loomis, Will Kerby, and Claus White. And our moderator is historian Dale Fisk from Council. We thank you again for coming, and our special thanks to our panelists and Dale Fisk. Let's give them a big welcome.
Well, I always like to start off with kind of general questions to the guys, but I would like the audience to be thinking of questions too, in case we get kind of slowed down. Sometimes we don't know what questions to ask. So if you have questions in the audience, be sure and hang on to them, and we'll ask for questions from the audience at some point. So I'll start out by asking each of you guys to just tell me a little bit about your history here in the Valley, whether you were born here or when you came here. Klaus, let's start with you. Were you born here in the Valley, or did you come here?
I was born in Norway.
Norway? Yeah. What year was that?
1927.
Yeah. How old were you when you came to this country?
6 months old.
Really? So you don't remember that very well.
Don't remember that.
And where did your folks live when you came?
First place that I can think of would be Idaho City. And from there we moved to McGregor.
How old were you when you came to McGregor?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Cabarton was the next place. Then
Yeah.
Scott Valley, and then McGregor.
When we came to Cabarton, how old were you?
Probably about 6
Yeah. And I assume your dad worked for Boise Payette?
at that time.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was his job?
I don't recollect what it was at that time,
Huh.
but he did run steam donkeys, and then he run or turned into a blacksmith, as far as I know.
So, where'd you go to school? You must have started school at Cabarton.
No, my first grade was in Scott Valley.
Now, where's Scott Valley?
It's about 5 or 6 miles east of Cascade.
Yeah.
One-room school.
Yeah. How many kids in the school?
I can't remember, about 8 or 9, I think.
Yeah. Have one teacher, I suppose?
One teacher.
How long were you there at that school?
I was just there 1 year, then we went to Cabarton.
Yeah. So you went to the Cabarton school then, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think I went to school there through my 3rd grade. Moved to McGregor and went to school there through my 5th grade, and moved to New Meadows and started my 6th grade here.
Now at McGregor, did they have a school right at McGregor?
Yes.
They didn't move the one from Cabarton, did they, or did they?
No, not that, no, I know they didn't.
Huh. Okay. Then what year was it when you came to New Meadows? Was that about 38, 39, something?
39.
39. Yeah. So
Fall of
how old
39.
were you at 39? You were 12?
13.
13? Okay.
Well, it was 12, and I turned 13 at that fall.
And did you go through high school here?
Oh, I went through, I quit in my last part of my sophomore year, I think, March.
Yeah.
That's the last of my school.
Did you go in the military or go out and start working?
No, I
or?
went to work for a rancher.
Yeah. So after
And then I went to the military. I turned 18. They drafted me.
Yeah. During the war, I guess, huh?
Well, it was after the war.
After the war, yeah. So when you got home from the military, is that when you went into logging yourself? Or?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
when I went to work for, at that time, I think it was Morgan.
Yeah.
Jerry Morgan.
Yeah. Okay, well let's go to you, Will. What's your story?
Well,
Where were you born?
can't remember.
Too little.
I was born in Cascade
Yeah.
and went to school at Cascade, graduated at Cascade,
Yeah.
and my grandfather, John Morgan, was with the Boise Payette Lumber Company when they were at Cascade. He was with them when they were Actually, it started at Cascade, and it was Weyerhaeuser.
Oh,
And he came here from Minnesota,
yeah.
and his home was in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
And he was a master mechanic he came east with Cross and C.A. Barton, and they landed there at Cascade, and they didn't stay at Cascade very long, and they moved down to Barton. Anyway, that's that part of the history.
So your dad was in on the
Well, it wasn't my dad, it was my grandfather.
Your grandfather, and
Yeah.
he was there when Weyerhaeuser and all those guys formed Boise Payette.
Yeah. Yep.
That's pretty good. So what year were you born?
I was born in 28,
28. Okay, and where'd you go? You say you went through high school at Cascade?
Cascade, that's right.
And what'd you do after high school?
Oh, I grew up on a farm,
Yeah.
and I went to the Korean War for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And when I came back from that, I got a job over here with J.I. Morgan,
Yeah.
52. Actually, I was going to school, when I got out of high school, I worked over here picking up the railroad track
Yeah.
of all the train tracks that run up and down all these draws.
The Shea lines? and
Shea
stuff like
lines.
that?
And we did that with Shay,
Yeah.
a little D4 tractor that picked up the rails and or cut them loose, and then they were unbolted and they were pulled up on a railroad car, and we took them up here to Rubicon and piled them in piles, and they sold them for scrap.
Huh.
McFall run Shay. I don't know if anybody remembers him, but he was quite a guy. And Pearl Fritzley run the loading thing that pulls the rails up, and Louis Sadoff and some others helped undo the track. But I did that in '47, and then I went to college for a couple of years, and then I went to the Korean War. And when I come back from the Korean War, I come to work over here for Jack, and it was 52.
So you say you were pulling up the tracks in '47?
Mm-hmm.
Were they pretty much through with shale logging at that time? Or were
Yeah.
they starting to use trucks?
You
pretty
know,
much?
because my grandfather was so connected, and then my Uncle Jack took my grandfather's place when he retired as a master mechanic and equipment superintendent.
Okay, well, let's stop there and go on to Warren, and we'll get you all up to the point where you're logging, and then we'll go back and kind of get some stories. Tell us, what year were you born and where?
I was born in 1919, and I was born down about a half a mile north of the old town of Arling down there, and it's under the lake now, the town site, but where I was born, it's still right on the bank of it.
Yeah.
And then I went 4 years of grade school at District 4 school. It was down south of Gold Fork.
Yeah.
And then we bought a farm up by Roseberry.
How old were you when you got that farm?
That was in 1930. I was in the 4th grade, probably 10 years old.
Yeah.
And then that's where we lived the rest of my school time. I went there to Roseberry and graduated out of the 8th grade there, and went to Donley High School and graduated from there.
What was the Roseberry School like? Was it a one-room school?
It was just a one-room school. We have all 8 grades in one room.
Yeah.
The schoolhouse itself, before that time, was a 2-story, and the upper grades went upstairs and the lower grades downstairs. But when I was there, most of Roseberry had moved to Donley, and they just had the one downstairs.
Where was
all
that?
8 grades.
Where was that school at? Where did it sit?
It was just on the Have you been over there?
Yeah, from the store, I know where the store
Yeah,
and the old church.
the store was just on the opposite corner
Oh.
across the square there.
Yeah. Huh. Okay, so, and you went from Roseberry, you went to school where? Donley?
Yes, high school. I went to high school at Donley.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
It was
What's,
a mile and a half, about a 2 mile walk to
Yeah.
high school over there all the time. And
was it uphill both ways in the winter?
I'll say it was.
It's pretty flat up here. Okay, so after high school, what did you?
Well, I got married
Yeah?
the year I got out of high school, 1938. And that's my wife Dorothy sitting over there in the middle. I met her in school. She's an old Cabartonite from Cabarton, and then when they came up to McGregor, why, she was in high school at that time, and the high school went to Donley, and the grade school where Claus was down at McGregor, and they had a school bus that brought the McGregor kids up to Donley, and that's where I met her. And then as we graduated, why, we got married that summer, and I went to work for Boise Payette at that time.
Yeah, you went right to work out of high school for them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact is, I worked for Boise Payette before I got out of high school, the summer that I was in my senior year.
What'd they have you doing at that age?
Oh, they cleared landings for the loggers and pile brush.
Yeah.
I was about the size of it that summer.
Okay.
And then the next summer, why, was when I got married, and I continued on the brush crew and clearing landings and things for a month or two, and then I went to work under Jack Morgan, who was Will's uncle, I guess, wasn't it? And he was foreman of the shop and took care of all of the Shays and loading rigs and things. And my first job under him was down at Smith's Ferry, night watching a steam loading rig. Had to coal it up every night and punch the flues out and keep a fire going and have it ready to steam up when the crew got there to work next day.
Did you keep it going all night, even in the summer?
Yeah, it was just bank of fire in it, and then
Oh, so it just
long
smokes.
torch morning, you'd spread it out and open the drafts on it and had a steam build up.
Was there any different process in the winter to keep it from freezing? Did you have to keep the fire a little bit hotter or do anything different?
Yeah, you had to, it was the same way with the Shays. I night watched the Shays for a while too. And you kept steam up all night, a low head of steam.
Yeah.
And
Now, is that in the summer too, or is that just in the winter?
well, in the summer too, because
Yeah.
they had to keep a low fire in them so they could get a quick start in the morning.
So was there much difference between what you did overnight in the summer and in the winter? Just about the same?
About the same.
Yeah.
They had steam heaters to keep things thawed out, and you turn steam in certain pipes to heat the water lines and things like that.
Did you ever watch them run those Shea engines as far as what's it call them, an engineer, or what would you call a Shea driver?
Yeah,
An engineer?
engineer. And that was my second job. I went to firing on one of the Shays then, and it was number 2 Shay. And Mid Nolan was engineer on that. And I got to be the number 1 fireman on the number 2 Shay and the second engineer of it. And that's when we came here to New Meadows and things. They begin to phase things out.
So what year did you come to New Meadows to live?
In 39.
39.
39 and 40.
Well, Barney, what's your story? Where and when were you born?
I don't remember. I was born in the Sand Hills in Nebraska, February the 5th, 1915. The snow was so deep the doctor couldn't get out, so my great aunt delivered me. But I think I had to help her because they said I weighed 12 pounds and she never weighed over 98. She lived till she was 98, was never married. I think after she seen me, she decided she wasn't going to go through what that was. I started school when I was 5 years old, horseback 2.5 miles. I had 2 older brothers. I guess I couldn't talk plain. The teacher sent me home, but Dad's horse and mules could understand me. And when I was 7, I started back to school. My younger brother was 5. We went through the 8th grade together. He went to high school 2 years, and I stayed home and worked. So my high school was between 4 and 6 head horses. Yeah. And when I come to Idaho, in 35, I went back eastern Nebraska with my girlfriend's husband, or father and brother, and shut corn for 3 cents a bushel. Seaman wagon.
That was in 35, during the Depression. So when did you leave Nebraska?
36.
36.
21 years old, and I come to Nampa and paid my own board and room, and supposed to pay half the gas, and I had $7 and owed him 11. So we come 1,300 miles on $22 worth of gas. He said, don't worry, get a job, and then I could pay him. So the first, got a job for $30 a month, and the first check I got, I went and paid him. My first car I bought was $24.60 a month, and I was making $30. But the next spring I went to $35.
How much did the car cost total?
$3 and $40.
Really?
I paid $100 down.
Was it new?
36 Willys,
Yeah.
10,000 miles on it. And then I went to work on this farm. I worked, when I first started irrigating, if I hadn't been too proud and too broke, I'd have went back where they don't irrigate. 160 acres, pretty rough to go. I stayed 2 years, and then I went to High Valley and worked for Marsters up there. But he was so crooked, he couldn't land under this table. Then I went back to see my folks, and then when I come out in 39, I worked on that same farm. I went back from Marsters in 40. I had another car in payments, and he said, there's no use of you sending your payments down there. He said, I'll just make them while I'm down. He had a lumber yard in Radin and a mill in High Valley. And a couple months later, this kid was hauling lumber, come up and told me the finance company was looking for my car, that I'd made no payments for a couple of months. So he said he told him they wasn't going to take my car, that he'd tell me not to straighten it out. I went and asked Marsters, and I just forgot that, and I said, you pay me what you owe me, I won't forget it. And I had a buddy who worked here at New Meadows. He told me he thought I'd get on. So I went over to Smith's Ferry on the way up there, and there was a guy there by the name of Jim Brooks, loading short logs for Boise Payette. I didn't know him, but I met him. And he said, well, Meisner was coming down to go to Boise, and he had to stop and see him. So I went and asked Meisner about a job, and he said, go up and tell Love to put you to work. I said, well, I'll give Moises 2 weeks' notice so I can get my money. And I come up on Friday night, told Love to put me to work, and so he sent me and another old guy that was piling brush, old Tom Lee. He evidently didn't have his 40 hours in because we went and chugged up the ties that had fell off the fires, I think over in Scott Valley. Then went on the brush crew on Monday, and it wasn't long till they took me off the brush crew and put me in the shop for taking shoes off the tracks and putting snowshoes on. They had a hole in the middle, and then they had spikes on both sides. Most of them, some of them you could get off of the wrench, but most of them you used a chisel and hammer. And when they laid the brush crew off, well, I happened to be in the shop, so I got to stay. And when they get through it that way, they sent me out to set chokers. Henry Love told me what cat to go on, and so we pulled up to the chokers, he backed up, and I jumped off the hook on the chokers, and Henry Love come running up and said, "You quit 30 minutes early tonight." I said, "What?" He said, "You ain't supposed to hook them chokers on." He said, "That's a cat driver. Your job starts when you hook up on a log." So I had to quit 30 minutes early. I had to stay out there. I had no way home, but I quit. And
So
then
what year was that you started for the company then?
started here,
For Boise Payette?
40,
1940.
in the fall of 40. And when they laid off, well, I went and made 3 trips back to Detroit, driving cars out, towing one and driving one. And I come back up here that spring, thought they might be ready to go to work, and Henry Love told me to go to Bear and pile brush for Andy Anderson. I said, "Well, I'm supposed to go to Idaho City and hook those logs." I said, "They won't start for a while." So I went to Bear, piled brush the next day, and come in for supper, and they said, "You're supposed to be in Idaho City in the morning." So that's where I went. Well, we drive for the fun of it, but then one day's work, it was all right. And I stayed over there then,
Okay.
41, 42, and 40, 43, and then I started driving truck.
So did you drive truck for a long time after that?
Not very long, I upset the first week. Had the old Coleman's, and mine had a sliding door, like a barn door, and the seat was a spring seat, with the inner tube for your backrest, the battery in under the seat. The guy broke me in. I'd made a few trips up here on Big Creek and went back up to, he was laying down by the water tank, had a water tank up there for the brakes. And I'd pull up on that hillside, and that Coleman raised up about that far and come back down, and I got spooked a little. That don't scare easy, but I told him that he better go up and look that turnout out over. He drove up there, and the same thing, and he got out and looked it over. You could see air facing under the wheel. So I was going back up, and I thought, why can't you back into that turn out better than you can pull in? Which I do sense. I don't know whether I started or not. I started back up in there and hit the edge of the road and flipped right over the middle of the road. On my side, I was trying to get the compression release pulled so it didn't hurt the motor, and the acid pouring on my back. And there's a guy up there that worked on the cats, and he had some water, and he washed my back off and come to the shop. And I didn't know whether they canned me or whether they put me back a hook. I didn't know what they do. And I brought to the shop and told him what happened, went by Ed Morgan's and told him I upset the 6th spot, and he said, "You get hurt?" And I said, "No, just now, a little acid on me." He said, "I'll be back Monday morning and it'll be ready for you." And I drove 37 years after that. Sometimes I kind of wondered why, but
So where'd the acid come from? Out of the battery or something?
yeah, battery under the seat.
It was where?
Under the seat,
Oh,
a Coleman is just like a Jeep, single axle, but you had a tandem trailer on it.
Yeah.
And it was a self-loading trailer. But that tandem heavy trailer on it and that single axle, it didn't take much to turn it upside down, I found out.
Did it have a 10-foot wide bed on it? Or how?
I think we did have 10 foot, yeah.
Yeah, water-cooled brakes, you say, with the
Yeah,
tank up
right,
over the
yeah.
cab or something? Yeah. Were the brakes much good on those trucks?
Motors wasn't much neither.
Yeah.
You wanted to stop where you could start, and start where you could stop.
They didn't work good enough to have water on them.
No.
So what year truck was that you started driving?
The Coleman,
Yeah, what year was it made?
36.
36. Yeah. Did it have hard rubber tires on it, or what
No,
kind of
it
tires?
had
Inflatable
yeah.
tires? Yeah.
But then after that, I was unloading the trucks down here, that 10-foot bunks, and a guy, they didn't have no heaters or radios in, or heaters or defrosters. And there was a guy that had kind of crooked feet, crippled a little bit. He come down there one time, and they had a loadmaster, a cat with a boom on it to unload. We put the crotch lines on and took the wrappers off. And I went, he was cold, shaking, and I went and knocked the back stake, and he knocked the front one. 3 logs come down, and the roadmaster wouldn't hold up and mashed his head in the end of the bunk and killed him. And so when I went back to driving, I was down there unloading, and Henry Love come along and said, "Jack wants to see you in the shop when you get through." And I went in there, and Jack said, take that 14, he was driving 14 truck. Take that 14 truck out, and he said, be careful, because it's awful slick and you're first out. I didn't know whether it was loading, but the top loader brake parts went out with me to show me. And a few years after that, they had an old flatbed, gooseneck trailer to haul equipment on, and the brakes weren't too sharp. And if you pulled in, then you had to drain the water or the air out of the tank so you could get the water out of it. And then when you hooked up, you had to close that. Well, I was supposed to haul a cat from over here someplace for Ted Tackman. And
Are you talking about the air tank?
yeah.
Yeah, for the brakes?
And while I was building up air, well, Ed Morgan went and changed the glad hands. Nobody knew then that you could paint one of them, you know what went. I over then got that cat, and I started down Goose Creek. Wasn't very long, so I decided I didn't have no brakes. The farther I come, the faster I come, and I get down there by Fox Farm, and I had to pass a state truck. We met speed cop at the same time. Had a dozer cat on there. Just where you come out of Craig Baum's Hot Springs up there, there was a car pulled out just ahead of me, and God, I kept gaining on him. I thought he'd pull off, and finally I blowed the horn, and instead of looking in the mirror, he looked out the back, but he never speeded up. I get down on the refrigerator curb, and I knew I had three choices, and I didn't have long to think of it. Either had to go over the bank and down into the brush, or run over him or pass him. If there'd been anybody coming, there wouldn't have been nobody left. None of us. But I passed him, and I knew I had a ticket from that speed cop. And I got by him and stopped, went back, and the trailer brakes were just as, well, it hadn't been hooked up, there was nothing to them. The truck brakes, you couldn't see the truck, but the emergency brake and the brakes, just the smoking, and here come the speed cop. I knew you had me. Come up, and he looked at the trailer, and he looked at the truck, and he looked at me, he said, man, that was a good piece of driving.
Did he give you a ticket?
No, I was kind of tickled. He told me that the second time. Man, that was a good piece of driving. He said, I almost ran him off in the creek with the dozer blade, but I couldn't help it. I had to pass that state truck.
You mentioned refrigerator curve. I haven't heard that before.
Well, right down here at the bottom of the hill where it gets frosty. And
Just when you come down past the hot springs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do they call it that?
because it frosts up in the fall and a little bit wicked, I guess, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Get
You
ice.
know,
Yeah. Because
know I
it's
was-
icy? Huh.
I was tickled to death when the sea lived with a straight road ahead of me.
Yeah, I'll bet. Well, Klaus, let's talk about when you went to work for Morgan. When you first went to work for Morgan, what did you do for him?
Clearing the new highway out here.
Oh, yeah? They're just building that, huh?
They were just building this new highway.
Is that where the highway is now?
That's where the highway is now. Yes.
Well, tell us a little bit about the old highway. I know some of it's still out there, and the bridge went down south of the one now, right? Came in,
Yeah.
just come around that ridge a little bit and back toward town, or how did that
Yeah,
work?
it went to the south of where the new highway is now. It's south on the south of the highway, and dropped over into Mud Creek, and then followed Mud Creek up for a little ways, and then got back onto the highway again.
Yeah. So you were clearing like right away for the,
Right away.
yeah.
Yes.
And do you remember any stories about when they were building the highway? Any,
No, not particularly. Just pile of brush and
yeah,
so forth.
yeah. So what, you got any stories from your early career with Morgan, or any accidents or any interesting things about some of the equipment that you used that you wouldn't want to use again, or
No, not really.
what kind of chainsaws were you using when you first started for him?
Well, they were home light, gear driven, home light
Yeah.
saws.
Pretty heavy, big heavy saws?
Yeah, pretty heavy.
Yeah.
But they weren't like the old ones, the old two-man saws. They were just one-man saw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some were pretty heavy on the handle.
But from there, I went to bumping knots, cutting limbs off logs behind the sawyers. And I did that for about half a summer, and then set chokers for the rest of the summer. Did that for a couple of years, and I had a good good cat driver, skidding cat driver. He taught me how to fly a cat.
Yeah.
So that was my next job, was skidding logs. From that, I graduated up into a dozer on the skidding crew, and from there, the dozer on the dirt crew, building roads. And then ended up with a foreman job on the dirt crew. And I don't know, did that for several years.
Did you build a lot of roads?
Pardon?
Did you build quite a few miles of road?
Boy, a lot of miles of roads.
How many of them are still there, still usable?
Well, I don't know how many's usable, but there's a lot of them still there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't build as many roads nowadays. They sure built a
No,
lot there for a
no,
while.
no, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you were foreman on the dirt crew, you say, for quite a while? Or?
I was for about 3 or 4 years, and then he made me a logging supervisor.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a while. And then he moved up into where I was appraising timber sales and roads and so forth. Took a lot of walking. And then ended up, Will and I, in a partnership with Morgan Company.
When was that? You remember about what year that was?
Will might know, I can't remember.
It was probably in the late 70s or early 80s.
So you were helping to run the company?
Yes.
Pretty much, huh?
At that time.
Yeah.
But then I retired from that in '92.
Yeah. What are some of the changes that you saw from when you first started?
Oh, it was
A lot of changes?
a lot of changing the equipment more than anything else, yes.
What were some of those early cats like?
Well, most of them at that time were cable-operated blades.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got into the hydraulics, which was a lot nicer.
With the cable operated, they just had to depend on the weight of the
Weight of the blade to drop it, yes.
Yeah.
No down pressure.
Yeah. How about power-wise? Were they a lot less powerful, or they're about the same, or?
Oh, they would always spin their tracks.
Yeah. Did they ever get any easier to start as they got new ones, or were they ever hard
Yeah,
to start?
instead of cranking the starting motor, you had electric start
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Well, Will, you say you started working for Morgan. What year was that when you started working there?
Probably it was 52.
What's that?
52 when I started working
Yeah.
there steady.
What was some of your early jobs?
I think the first thing I did was set chokers.
Yeah,
I did that for a couple of years.
yeah.
And I did the same as Claus. I was running the skidding cat. And my instructor was John Fields' dad. He was an old-time cat driver.
What was his first name?
What was his first name, John?
Ralph.
Ralph. God, we go blank.
Oh, yeah, well,
Anyway, and I did that for a couple of years, and then I turned the cat over at Warm Lake and broke my arm, and I guess they decided I should try something else, so they put me to mechanicing, and I did that for quite a few years. And my Uncle Ed was master mechanic at that time, and he passed away, and like Klaus, we worked up through the thing. I became the equipment superintendent for the company. And Klaus and I worked together. That way, he was the logging end of it, and I was the equipment side of it. You asked a minute ago about the changes. There was a lot of changes, because when I first come to work, they loaded logs, and they had a cross line, and they had two hookers on the log, and the machine would swing around, and there's two people out there and hook the hooks into each end of the log, and they'd pick it up and put it on the truck. And then they came up with just a long boom and a set of tongs, and they just had one hooker that hooked the logs, and then pretty soon they come up with a grapple, and they didn't have anybody on the ground. They just Seltzball running the grapple machine. It was just like he had fingers. He could just float that thing out there and pick up a log and put it on. So that did with way there wasn't anybody on the ground, which made it safer.
Tell me a little bit more about that. Was that on a cable?
It was on a boom.
Yeah.
It had a gooseneck in it, and there's actually two cables because one closed the thing and the other
Well, yeah.
opened it. And so it just opened a big old grapple, and he just floated out there, and he knew exactly where to hook it on to make that log balance, pick it up, and the log would go into the boom, and he just put it on the truck.
Yeah.
And so that saved a couple men. Things got more efficient, and machines kept changing. Caterpillar come out with new type machines, and
So you say your uncle was Jack Morgan. How were you related to your mother? Your
well, it was
father?
through my mother and my grandfather that I said came from Nova Scotia.
Mhm. So your mother's father?
It was my mother's father, yeah. Yeah.
So where's Jack fit into the family?
Well, Jack was my mother's brother.
Mother's brother.
Yeah.
You said you had an uncle Ed, did you say?
That was Jack's brother.
Okay, so your mother and Jack and Ed were all in the same
Yeah.
family. So was that an advantage to have your uncle to work for, or or was that harder
Well,
in
I
some
don't know.
ways?
Maybe sometimes.
Yeah.
In between time, I drove truck
Yeah.
for a ways, and I think the first day I drove truck, I drove it off the end of the bridge. So I kept saying, well, they keep trying to find me something to do that I can do.
Didn't you break your arm in that wheel?
Well, when I rolled that cat, I broke my arm
Yeah.
pretty bad. And
I come along there about
I
10
had
minutes after that happened.
cast on for about 11 months. Anyway, I went to work that next spring. I still had my cast on. And I kept going back to the doctor because it kept breaking. And I had this cast on. I remember on those cats, you had to lift the air cleaner up. Well, I'd put my arm on it, and that made a good pry. And maybe that's the reason it broke, I don't know. But anyway, I had 2 or 3 skin grafts, and you say you come by right after
Yeah.
that had happened?
That's about the first one there, I think.
Well, after that, I went to mechanic. I stayed mechanic, and from there on until, like I say, Claus and I worked together, and I think it was in the mid-70s that Jack had a heart attack. And at that time, I just kind of filled in his job, and Claus and I just kind of run the company after that,
Yeah.
along with some other good people.
So Jack was pretty much in charge of the shop, you say he was?
Well, he was when he came over here, but
Yeah.
he bought the operation from Boise Pat Lumber Company.
Yeah.
And that was in 1946. There was a big shuffle in Boise Pat Lumber. Barney mentioned Win Miser, and they decided to replace him. They replaced him with a committee. And there was Jack and Henry Love and Gordon McGregor and Bert Cochran, I think it was. That went on for 2 or 3 years, and during that time they bought the Andy Anderson logging operation in Council. And Gordon McGregor was running it. And I don't know, it was like any committee, they had some problems. And Jack decided he was going to leave the company, and they said, well, why don't you buy it? And so what they did, he didn't want to buy the whole thing, and so Gordon McGregor, it was split up. He took the council operation, which I think was 4 trucks and 2 or 3 cats and several. And Jack took this New Meadows operation. There's a letter over there in one of those things from the Boise Pet Lumber Company that says that the deal had been made and Jack Morgan was in charge of all their equipment, their land, and their logging. And that was in 1946.
How did Andy Anderson fit into all that? Was he pretty much his own boss?
Well, you know, Andy Anderson was kind of an icon
Yeah.
in old-time logging. I don't know how long he'd been down at council, but he'd been over in Long Valley for quite a few years.
Up in High Valley, when I first knew him logging with horses
Yeah.
and hauling with the trucks.
He was kind of an icon, really. And he just retired. He was a good friend of Jack Morgan's. And he, I guess, just wanted to get out of it because he sold it to Boise Pet, and it was very shortly after that that Boise Pet split up and gave part of it to Gordon and part of it to Jack.
Did Andy Anderson, though, kind of have his own trucks, or were they company
Yeah,
trucks?
he owned his own whole thing when the
Yeah.
Boise
So
Cascade
he's kind of an
bought it.
independent
He was an
contractor?
independent,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, what was he best known for? I heard that he was one of the first guys to put diesel engines in trucks or something.
Well, I
and
think he
use them
was
for-
one of the first ones that had trucks.
Best known for big loads.
Yeah.
And when New Meadows moved over here, because my grandfather and so forth, they were only gonna be here for 4 or 5 years, and they didn't know where they were going after that, because that's all the logging was gonna be here. And that's when trucks become in, and that changed the whole picture as far as they tore up the railroad tracks and started building roads.
Was that why they figured your timber wouldn't last longer than that, because the old Shays just couldn't reach it all?
That's right, because they could only go up a certain grade.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. They went up Mud Creek and all these different places, and over at Cascade, all those different places, and they just cleaned out what they could get. And they had cats that skidded the logs in with big arches, and they could bring big loads, so they skidded them for what, half a mile or more, or
Mile and a half.
mile and a half
Yeah.
sometimes. And they'd have tremendous loads, almost truckload. And they treated into a landing in these draws where the Shays could get to, and then they were loaded on railroad cars, and I can still see the trains coming down the track in McGregor, and I don't remember over here at New Meadows, but anyway,
For a while, did they
that
have-
just changed the whole picture when trucks come in.
For a
It
while,
opened up a whole new area.
Yeah, so they could just build roads anywhere they wanted and run it.
Yeah, it was through the Forest Service, yeah.
Now, did they have Shays and trucks operating at the same
I
time
don't think
for a
so.
while?
I don't think so, not for very long.
Yeah. But maybe for a short time? Or did
For
they
a
just
short
make-
time during the transition.
Yeah.
There probably was, because they were testing out trucks. I think the first trucks they had here, weren't they Fords? They had some Ford trucks once, I got some pictures of. And that didn't work out.
He had that Ford truck
Yeah.
over on a pole job at Cascade.
Oh, was that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That little
30
stud mill he had with it.
36 speeds ahead, and then logging them poles over there at Cascade, and they caught fire, and they called Jack, and he said, "Let her burn."
Yeah, the first trucks they had was,
Kenworths.
they got 5 new Kenworths.
Yeah.
And a
Number one.
GMC.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah,
under that.
okay, GMC.
And that number 1 truck you was showing me, that was.
Yeah, I got a picture over there, the number 1 truck, and then loading
Those
it.
Anderson's trucks? or
No,
County trucks?
no, these were ones Jack bought.
Yeah.
The ones Anderson, after Gordon took it over, I'm sure he replaced them the same way with
Yeah.
Kenworths and so forth, the ones. And what kind of trucks did Andy Anderson have? They weren't Kenworths, I
They
don't
were
think.
Kenworths.
Were they?
Yeah.
Okay, well, he's the one that started out first with the Kenworths before the company did.
Did he
so.
switch the engines in those to put diesels in them? It seems like I read something about he was one of the first ones to put a diesel engine in a Kenworth truck or something like that.
And diesel, you know.
Yeah, it could be, I don't know.
Yeah.
One thing's kind of interesting,
And-
Warren was talking about keeping the steam engine going at night.
Yeah.
And there's a book that was over there at the office that I think Jack, my uncle, worked out, and it was whether to put a diesel engine in this loading rig or keep the coal. And part of it was the night watchman, you get rid of him, so. So as it worked out, and diesel was 11 cents a gallon, so it was all worked out in a systematic way, one versus the other, and the diesel, of course, went out, and they changed the coal over to diesel in the Marion
Yeah.
motor.
Did you say there's still something that somebody has that's written out?
Yeah.
Where's that at?
Oh, you know, I looked for it over there. I thought I took it home with me, but it's either over to the office or I've got it stuck someplace over
That'd be
there.
a pretty valuable artifact.
And another thing that's over there is wages in 1931.
Yeah.
They were 40 cents an hour,
Okay.
and it's one thing that was kind of interesting in that time. The Teamster got paid about as much as anybody,
Yeah.
and they had a barn boss, and they had Teamsters, and they had supervisors, and that's in some things that I've got over there too. It's written out. And there's quite a bit of that, and there's a whole bunch of contracts for building. This is early on. The railroads were built, a lot of them, by Morrison Knudsen,
Yeah.
and there's a bunch of old contracts over there that.
When you say over there, where you?
Well, at the office,
At the
the
Morgan
J.L.
shop?
Morgan office, yeah.
Was the Morgan shop in that area, was that always there when Morgan first
Yeah,
came here?
well, they built it.
Yeah. But
And
that's
then
where
it
they,
burned down.
And when they moved here, they built it,
yeah.
and then it burned.
Yeah.
Burnt during the war.
And the one end of
built
that,
it again.
it's got that high thing, and it used to have a railroad track that they just run the Shea
Hmm.
in, and it's still that way. Of course, the tracks are gone, and they've done away with that end of it, but it was open, it was a high open one that they could, but it did burn, I don't know what year. It burned.
About 1944, I think, or 43.
It wasn't very long after they
It
moved
burnt-
over here.
It burnt while I was in the Navy.
Did they build back in about the same place? Or?
Exactly the
Same
same place,
thing,
yeah.
wasn't it? Burn it back, same place, build it back.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, the railroad, the rails was right in the concrete floor of the old
Mhm,
shop,
yeah.
and they built a new shop right on there.
Yeah.
Where we run the engines in there, work on them in the wintertime.
I remember him talking one time about Henry Love, I
Yeah.
think it was. They tied his pickup to the rails in the shop. He took off the next morning and left his rear end laying there on the floor. Isn't that right?
I'll try to hurry that.
That wasn't any of you guys, was it?
No, it couldn't have
It
been.
had to be them, it wasn't me.
I liked Henry. I was pulling and bringing a cat home from Smith's Ferry one time over to New Meadows, and Henry said, "Don't worry about the traffic, I'll run them all in the ditch." And he did. He had to come up through the catches that was all off the road.
Well, it's getting to be toward 8 o'clock. Let's take a short break and have some refreshments, and we'll come back in about 10, 15 minutes. Okay, I don't think we've run out of stories yet. These guys are pretty good talkers. But I was just now talking to Klaus and Warren. They were talking about your son, or Will. Your sons are doing, pretty much took over your jobs in this third generation of
It's my
walkers.
third generation anyway.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. So your son Klaus, what's his job officially? He's working for Morgan, right?
Well, he's working with the company and, but timber appraisals, road appraisals, and,
Yeah.
and overseeing the jobs.
Yeah. And what's your son doing?
Well, he's doing the same thing I was doing. He's kind of running the company and doing, overseeing the maintenance end of it and so forth.
think
But I don't know, they intermingle back and forth now, and it was a whole different thing than when Klaus and I were doing it. It's changed, and I don't know that there's gonna be another generation because the logging industry just isn't there. You know, that was one thing that was neat about this company. We had second and third generation people that were coming up and out of high school that was working for us, and now there isn't anybody coming up out of high school that's looking for a job because there's better places to look than in the lumber industry and the logging. It's a whole different thing.
So how's the company doing? How's Morgan?
They've changed.
Yeah,
They do they do subdivision work.
really?
They do some logging. This year they're doing more than they have because the Boise Cascade split up and it's changed around, and they are doing some more for them, more than they have been for the last few years. They're hauling most of their logs to Grangeville.
I was gonna ask, they haul some to Tamarack?
They haul some to Tamarack, and they haul some to John Day, Oregon, and they haul some to LeGrand, Oregon. I don't know that they're hauling any to LeGrand. They did a lot last year, but they're just different now. They're, like I say, they're doing subdivision work, and they've got a rock pit out here. They do quite a bit of gravel work. They've done it for the state.
Diversified, sounds like
They-
that's a good way to survive after, because.
The only way you're gonna survive
Yeah.
is diversified. They got into a big rock pit business too, gravel, pit run rock.
Yeah, Klaus and I bought the rock pit before we quit. Now they're using it.
Well, I wanted to ask you guys what you remember about the move from McGregor to New Meadows. Were any of you personally in on that, or?
I was on the train at that time that brought a lot of the camp over here.
Did they bring any, now I've seen, Dave Kosky has that My Donnelly video, I don't know if you've seen that. He has some footage of them loading portable houses on trucks.
Yeah,
And it was my impression they moved most of them by rail, but did they do both, or?
both, yeah.
Yeah.
Most of the houses came by truck,
Really?
on Anderson trucks. And, things like the community hall, it came over in 3 pieces on block cars.
Yeah.
And I was a fireman on this engine at that time. I brought that over. And we was coming down Big Creek up here, and half of that community hall just collapsed out into Big Creek there. The chairs went floating down. And so we brought the rest of it into town here and unloaded, and then they built a new half.
Oh, they didn't put it back on or anything, it was too badly?
No,
torn up?
it just went like a deck of cards out there.
So they built the half, the new half.
Mm-hmm.
The other interesting things about that is there was a railroad track built just for that purpose, to get the Shays and so forth over here that came from Donley to New Meadows. And that's the same line that they're talking about building that highway, if they ever build it. Because railroad, or the Shays could only go, I don't know, 5 or 6% grade, not that fast, about 3.
No, they go up to 7%.
They would?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, let's see.
Yeah, they had what they called a little crown sheet in them so that the water wouldn't all run to one end of the boiler. And because if that crown sheet ever run out of water, that's when they'd explode.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I didn't know they would,
there was,
and that's the reason they used Shays, is because they had so much more power than just a normal, they were a gear-driven machine. Most locomotives are not built that way. It was low gear.
Did they actually run the Shea name brand engines here, or were they just did they just call them Shays and they were another name brand, or do you remember?
They're Ephraim Shays.
yeah, I've got a picture in the book here of that number 2 Shay when it come out of the factory back at Lima, Ohio. That's where they built Lima Iron Works back there.
Well, getting back to the move, the house that I lived in McGregor was moved on the train over here,
Yeah.
and my mother rode in it.
Really?
That's right. She wasn't gonna leave the house.
Is it still here?
The house is still here.
Yeah. How many of those houses are still standing around? Is there quite a few of them?
I think most of them, there's 2 or 3 that have burned,
Yeah.
but most of them are standing. They called it Morgantown.
Yeah. Most of them have been remodeled somewhat.
Well, yeah. It's been run down lately,
Yeah.
it seems like.
They
But
were-
anyway, go ahead, Barney.
They were remodeled a lot when we moved over here to Meadows,
Yeah.
because that's the first time that we was hooked to water and sewer.
Yeah.
And they built, and they were all round roof houses when they brought them over here. So they put the pitch roofs on them and added an L
Yeah, they had the kitchen.
kitchen and bathroom onto them. Most of them were just a front room and a bedroom in each end. And the front room was a kitchen, dining room, and sitting room, and the whole works.
Yeah.
And then they put the pitch roofs on, and it was a real nice looking camp here when
When it was first done.
Now, did the company do that work as far as putting the roofs on them and stuff and setting them up, or was that up to the people that?
Yeah, they were company houses, most of them.
And the company did it.
Some of them were private owned. I owned my own house when I came here,
Yeah.
and the Boys Payette, they let us charge all that building material for overhauling the house. We had to bring them up to standard with the bathrooms and everything, but that was all financed by the company, and we've taken out of our wages to build at the time.
What about the land? Did the company own the land they were sitting on, or was it city property?
Yeah, it was, I think originally,
It was owned by the company because I've got some deeds where they bought it.
from
So
the-
they owned that land, the company
Yeah.
owned that land, and when Jack took over Boise Cascade, or Boise Payette Lumber Company, their logging, that was one of the things that it said in there, the land and all that went with it. When I first started working here, one of my jobs in the winter, we were working on houses over there, and it was interesting because some of the houses, we cut the ends off or into the floors, and some of those houses had 3 different floors on them, and some of them had cork, loggers used to wear the cork shoes,
Yeah.
and they just wore those floors out. I guess they just wore them, that's when they were bunk houses probably, and
Yeah.
Huh. And they just built a new floor?
they just put a new floor on top of it. Some of them had 3 floors.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of those houses were built at Cascade there before they ever went to Cabarrus.
Is that right? Yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys what effect the Depression had on logging around here. Was there much difference? Did they lose a lot of, did the wages go down, or was it harder to get a job logging then, or what was different when
I
the
don't know.
Depression hit?
It was before my time. The Depression, I think, was
Yeah.
Well, Did
32.
your parents ever tell you
Yeah, I
stories
don't
about
know.
it though, as far as?
Oh,
Barney,
I went to it back in Nebraska. They picked up a little bit when I come here, $30 a month. Back there was 20, I got 25 because it took care of the place while he had his wife to Omaha. And didn't gain much because we had 10 kids and Dad couldn't pay all the bills, and so this guy was sharecropping for the doctor, and when we got ready to settle up, my Dad had to go with me, and they took most of my wages for back doctor bills. Wasn't for me because there wasn't no doctor there.
there was a,
When I come here, they 58 cents an hour, and they had the bunk houses on the railroad track there. They had would be 2 bunks high here and on both ends, and then 1 bunk here. And they had bull cooks. They'd cut the wood and bring it in. When you come in at night, they'd have the bunkhouse warmed up for you, and they had a 3-gallon, 5-gallon, I think, of them square cans with water, had it heated for you so you could wash before you went to supper. $1 a day for 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and supper.
These were portable bunkhouses on rail cars or just built on a rail?
It was a rail car and they just built inside.
Yeah.
They put them inside. They had 3 bull cooks that cut all the wood.
Now, was that before they moved the houses over here?
Oh,
or-
no, the houses, yeah, when I come down.
Okay, so just like for temporary workers or something that?
Well,
had
they-
bunkhouses?
Got
Those,
single.
those camps and bunkhouses, they would, like when we was at McGregor there, they load all them bunkhouses on these flat cars and take them like up on Kinley Fork over there, and they had a big camp up there.
Oh,
And they'd unload them off
so
the
they just-
cars,
Yeah.
and
On weekends, my buddy and I didn't want to get up that early, so later on we'd go uptown and I'd have a hot pork sandwich and coffee, 25 cents, and he'd have a hot beef with milk, it was 30.
yeah, that first year that I went to work for the company, I admit, they're paying 35 cents an hour for brush piling up there.
That's what they paid down there for Marsters, and you got 58 up here, but when I went to cash the check, they'd cash it down there, you couldn't get one guy.
Did you work 8 hours, 9 hours, and 6 days a
Just-
week?
Just 40 hours a week, regardless of,
Of what?
most of it was around.
And not on Saturdays?
Yeah, when it went on the train, by then we worked long hours.
That's why old Henry made me quit 30 minutes, you see. There was a lot of fighting over the 40 hours then, and he didn't want no overtime.
Yeah.
Took 5 minutes, 3 minutes, jump off and hook them up, but I'd take off 30 minutes that night, because Catherine was supposed to.
We'd worked right up till the 40 hours was up, and we'd stop right there, and then the other train crew had to come, and the relief crew would have to come out and find us.
You didn't get travel pay?
No, we drove our own car.
I heard you guys mention unions a while ago. What effect did unions have in this area? I know the company later had union people working. When did that first start? How did that affect logging around here, wages?
Well, the union came with the Boise Payette transaction,
Yeah.
and
Now, which one? What year?
it was 1946. That's when Morgan took it over, and he just took on the union. The union used to throw parties for Jack. Jack used to throw parties for the union.
So was the union pretty influential after that as far as?
Whatever Boise Cascade done, Jack went for.
Yeah, that's right.
Were most of the employees union employees then at that
Yeah,
point?
they were pretty much
Very
all.
good. Regular guys wasn't union, they'd brag that they got the same pay as we did, but they didn't have to pay union dues, but then we got paid overtime after 8 hours, and they had to work 40.
Was there ever any conflict as far as between management and unions and stuff like that, or did it go pretty smoothly?
Well,
very
later
much.
on, there was problems,
Yeah.
and the union was finally voted out.
Oh, yeah.
But,
I still got an old union contract book down there.
yeah, I see one in my stuff the other day
Yeah.
that happened. But it was just because of changing times and different people that come that had different ideas. I could go into the biggest problem, but I'm not, I guess.
I remember when we first moved over here to New Meadows, why, old Dr. Thurston there at council contracted our medical work. It cost, they deducted $1 out of our paychecks a month, and that covered our whole family. And old Dr. Thurston,
About once a week.
he was the company doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have any memories of him?
No, my.
Yeah, I do.
What
I
do you?
was having a lot of stomach trouble, and Dr. Thurston couldn't figure it out. Finally, I went to him, and he gave me a bottle of, prescribed a bottle I got at the drugstore, of something, take 2 spoons a day or whatever, and had a big skull and crossbone on it, instead of shake well. So I waited a week, and I took it back to him, and he said, I told him it was no better, and he said, I don't know, I give up, I don't know what's the matter. And I said, I thought so when you gave me that bottle of poison. I didn't know what to do. And so I gave it to him, he looked at it, and he took it back up, and he claimed that the druggist had reached in a shake well, little blue thing, and got a poison instead of a shake well, but that poison was big as the top of that cup, and the shake well was very big. I didn't take it. They finally figured out I would go up on a cable to hook onto the trailers and then jump off on the frozen ground. Is what was the matter with my stomach. I remember him. He was a good doctor, though.
To go back a ways, not to get off the subject, but at the end, you were asking about the depression and what effect it had. There's a, and I can't think of her first name, a Higgins that wrote a book. Do you know, John? What? Higgins.
Hubert?
Well, it was Hubert Higgins's brother's wife. And she wrote this book, and it's about Cabarton and so forth. And she's still living, and she's 110 years old. I just talked to my Aunt Eleanor, who's my mother's sister. She's 97, and she told me that she was still living, and that she stayed in touch with her. Anyway, she wrote this book, and in this book, one thing that was written about Cabarton at the end of World War I, it was 1918 or 17, that at the end of the war, they had their camp there at Cabarton, but they had camps all over, and so they run the, it was my grandfather. He run the Shays up to all those camps, and they brought the people back to Cascade so they could celebrate the end of World War I. Anyway, that's written exactly, pretty much like that in her book.
Yeah. And her name is
Well,
Higgins, and
It's Higgins, and I should know it,
Do
but
you
I
remember the name of the book at all?
I've got it.
When did it first come out? When did she write it?
Oh, I think she was, I think when she first wrote that, she was 101.
Not long
Where does she
ago.
live at?
She lives in California. But her husband was John Higgins, who was Hubert Higgins's brother. And he worked here for the company that we did
I don't
then.
remember him. And you got a sister that's 97?
Pardon?
You have a sister that's 97?
My Aunt Eleanor was Jack's sister,
Oh,
and my mother's
97.
sister.
Warren, I wanted to ask you, you said you were a fireman for the Shea engines. Did they have what they called a Johnson bar on them?
Yeah.
Or is a reverse lever and a Johnson
Yeah.
bar the same thing?
Yeah, it was a big lever that stood about that high right beside the engineer. And it was graduated with notches and the slower the engine got pulling, why, the more you'd notch that Johnson bar up to keep them from drawing water out of the boiler and through the pistons. And
Now, is a reverse lever, is that the
yeah,
same thing?
it
Or
was
is that,
Tur back was reverse and
but it's the
tur
same
ahead
bar,
was
right?
forward. And then as they begin to work, of course, you worked them backward just as much as you did frontwards.
Yeah.
Because like you'd take the cars out in the mornings, why you'd push them ahead of you all the way up. And then coming in, well, of course, you'd have to get on the other end of them at the passing track and back the engine clear to town.
So it was forward and reverse on the same lever, just depending
Yeah,
on which way you
yeah,
had it?
and then you would graduate it in notches, however however hard you was working the engine and slowing down it,
Yeah.
you
Was-
keep advancing.
Was that linked to a gear mix, like a transmission type?
No, it did the valves, it just timed the valves and the pistons,
Huh.
reversed them.
Yeah. There's probably not too many people
Yeah.
around that know how all those work.
Then they had a big, the throttle was a big handle about that long. Worked out with your left hand, your brakes and air and everything with your right hand.
What would the throttle actually do? Increase the heat or the steam pressure, or how would that work?
They had twin compressors on them,
Yeah.
and you had the air brakes. We used mainline cars and all.
Because you had a regular gauge track, is that what they ran, or did they
Yeah.
run a narrow gauge? They didn't
Yeah,
run narrow
and
gauge.
they were all Union Pacific cars that
Yeah.
we used except for camp and pick and steel and things. Those were company cars. But we'd pick them right up here in New Meadows or over at McGregor with,
Yeah.
and take them to the woods.
But the company cars and the Union Pacific cars were all regular gauge, they didn't have a narrow
Yeah.
gauge.
Yeah, they were all standard gauge. In fact, we run our engine, the Shays on the Union Pacific lines a lot.
Yeah.
We took one engine, Mid-Nolan and I, cleared to Smith's Ferry from New Meadows here. Took it back over our track that we moved camp here on and logged on. And went over and got on the main line, went clear to Smith's Ferry down there with it to load Anderson logs.
Take her any wrecks?
Uh,
They ever have a Shea wreck?
Yeah, there's a picture in a book that Dutch got there
Yeah.
of the wreck over on Gold Fork over there.
They derail very often,
Yeah,
the cars
it
derail.
bent the frame and everything, and they had to get there was another 3 or 4 Shays down there at Barber that used to run up to Idaho City for the same company that Boyce had. And that number 21, they brought up here and rebuilt the 2 spot within. You tell about it in that Weatherall book there.
Oh, yeah.
Warren, where did the train track cross the Payette River, Long Valley, to come over here?
Right up, you know where Brown's ranch buildings are? Pretty well to the end of or just past the end of the airport there at McCall. They go up over a hill. Well, it was down in there, right straight west of that. We come up the main line to there and then went across the river to right over to Sunflower Flat there.
Is there anything left there as far as a bridge or anything like that?
Pardon?
Is there anything left there where they crossed the river? Did they build a bridge, or did they have?
I don't
use
know
it?
if there's anything left there yet or not.
They must have had to build their own bridge, didn't they?
Yeah, they
What a bridge, sir.
They-
Is that pretty close
they
to what
built
they
it.
call Norwood?
huh?
Is that where, pretty close to where they call Norwood? They're,
I think
Yeah,
the track
it's
branched.
in north of
huh?
Norwood.
They're
yeah.
north of Norwood.
Yeah.
I think the track branched before it climbed the hill, didn't it? When you come out of McCall, and there's that hill, but I think it branched before they climbed that grade and went off to the west there, is my impression.
Yeah, I used to know what milepost that was on the railroad that we took off from. We went down there across the Payette River, and we had coal docks and everything there for quite a while. We logged that, above Sunflower Flat and all that in there.
You had coal docks, you say, where you store coal?
Oh, yeah.
Where was that at?
Well, it was just right in the upper end of Sunflower Flat there. down next to the river.
Yeah. What else was there?
And these coal bins they'd make, they had one up here on Big Creek and one out here on Mud Creek, and the tracks, they'd take the Shea and take the coal car right up on top and dump it, with out the bottom,
Yeah.
instead of having to shovel that off.
Did you have to shovel it onto the tender though when you?
We'd have to shovel it out of there into the Shays. The
Yeah.
night watchman did.
Yeah. Did the Shays have a tender that they would pull, or was it all built in? Was there a coal storage area right in the back of the Shay, or how'd that work?
Yeah, right back of the cab, there's a coal bin there.
Yeah.
It's held 10 ton.
Really?
And one was logging up Big Creek here and going over into Fish Lake up in there, Mud Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Why, we'd burn that 10 ton of coal and we'd have to re-coal. That's why they had to bin up Big Creek there, because we'd have to refuel up there.
Was that part of the fireman's job to shovel it in there?
You
And
bet.
Yeah.
Anytime you shovel 10 ton into that firebox, you'd bend some.
then you had to shovel it again to get it to burn, huh?
Yeah,
Hot fire with that.
yeah.
Any more questions from the audience?
Yeah, I have two, if I can remember what they are. One is, did you log all winter, or did you stop?
No, not, we usually close down along in the first part of February. They deck logs all in town here, you can probably remember that. And out along the lane here out toward Bill Ross's out there. We decked
30 million that
after
one
the
year.
mill pond froze down at Emmett where they couldn't take the logs down there, then they deck them here. And in the spring, when they thawed out before they'd get in the woods and things, but they'd load out of these decks and take them to the mill.
My other question was the Shea Engine. Have there been any of those wonderful looking machines ever preserved, or is there one in existence anywhere?
I have a hard time hearing.
Is there a Shea that exists that might have been preserved or kept, or have they all, what happened to them after they were phased out?
The Shays?
Yes.
Well, there's another picture of that in this book. The one I worked on was right down at the end of the, over here by the county road. And the kids, they broke all the instruments out in the windows and everything. And Jack, he finally just sold them for scrap during the war.
There was one of them that wasn't.
Uh,
There was one that wasn't. It went
Yeah.
to Emmett for a switch engine.
Yeah, number 4, I think, was down there.
There was two of them that were cut up for scrap.
Yeah.
Did we put one of them in a sawmill or something to run a?
No, I don't think so. And Dwayne Peterson tells me that he thinks it's in Nevada in a museum.
What about the one that's running over at Sumter? I was
Well,
under the
that
impression-
was a narrow gauge track.
Yeah.
Really?
That was all narrow gauge track over there. That's the only place that I know. Those Shays were tipped over half the time.
Those narrow gauge, most of them were what they call Heisler engines. They had cylinders on both sides, and the drive shaft went down the center of them. Whereas the Shays were all, the boiler was offset on them, and then 3 cylinders on one side, and it run a big crank that went the full length of the tender. They had universal joints in them.
There's one Shay at Missoula, Montana. It wasn't one of our Shays, but it was one that was used up there, but it was just like our Shays. It's in a museum in Missoula, a logging museum.
Now, they had the shaft, the gear that went down the middle, it would drive the wheels directly
Yeah,
from
there-
that shaft, right?
There was a big gear on the side of each wheel, and then a pinion on the on this drive shaft that went down the side that mashed into it. They were gear driven.
Now, did they get better traction because like when you had a pitman arm going around like this, there'd be a part of that turn that would spin the wheels probably with more pressure on it, and the gear drive would be more steady pull, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, every wheel drove on the tender, and
It's kind of like having four-wheel drive.
yeah, there's about let's see, there's about 8 sets of drivers on them.
Now, maybe Will would share a little bit about the company. Well, I remember seeing a picture of some equipment that Jack started the company with. They were kind of lined up. There was a saw and I don't know what all. How much equipment did Jack start the company with actually? And what did it grow to at its peak? How many people were employed? How many trucks did you run? And I think you told me there was almost a $3 million payroll that went out of this company.
I'm
At its peak.
Well-
sorry, Roberta,
Well, she was
your
asking-
voice is
She
high.
was
and-
asking me.
She was asking about when Jack first started the company on his own, what kind, she's seen pictures of equipment. She wanted to know about the equipment, what kind of equipment he had, and the situation when he first started.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jack told me the first thing that of course he had these D8 cats, and one of them sitting over here that was transferred with the company when he took over, that one that's got the arch over here. But Boise Pet, he didn't pay anything down. He just had a 10-year contract to pay off what they wanted for it. And he told me the only money that he borrowed was for a bus to get his people to work. Jack was very conservative. But anyway, the equipment was pretty much just that. It was a railroad. There were some trucks with it at that point, and but most of the truck thing Jack started after he took over.
Yeah.
And first 5 they bought, they were brand new.
And they did experiment with electric power saws, I know that. I've got some 16 millimeter film that shows that. They had a little D4, had a generator on the back, and had a cable that run to the power saw. And you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That thing it had a 440 volt generator.
Yeah, and it was a different cycle
Yeah.
than our regular electricity, and they used that, but only for a few years, 2 or 3
Yeah.
years, and of course then they come up with better power saws that were powered. We used to have several of them over there around the shop, but I think a lot of them have disappeared. I think I know where a couple are. But they used to have some old Diskin.
Yeah.
They're all 2-men thing. And it took about a man to lift one end of it. And
Horse distance.
they had a filing shop over there at the shop. They'd bring the chains in and file them every night. And
Did those big 2-man saws, didn't they have a bigger chain with bigger teeth on
it was a bigger chain, a bigger thing, and they had the thing so it swiveled to the side, so they cut sideways.
You mean the bar and the...
Yeah, it had swiveled totally to horizontal, and then it had swiveled to vertical, because after you sawed the tree down, you had to saw vertical,
Yeah.
so it had a swivel.
Well, I know what I wanted to ask you guys in the picture over there we were talking about. There's a team hooked to a thing that goes around, and it looks like it was driving a drag saw type thing.
I don't know exactly how that works,
You
but
know,
that's what
I don't either.
that picture shows, and that's what it was doing, because it's got a gear there, and the team is pulling that handle out there, and it's got an eccentric, and it worked the drag saw up and down. That was called a lean-to saw, or
Yeah. Of course, course, that was 1900, that's before any of you guys' time, but some of you probably remember drag saws, I suppose.
Well, yeah. We had a drag saw on the ranch to saw logs for wood.
Yeah,
I've got a drag saw out there at home.
yeah, does it still run?
Well, it did, here about 3 years ago it ran. I haven't tried it since.
Did they ever use those in the woods for logging at all? They would have been pretty
No, I
cumbersome,
not that I know of.
mostly for
They
cutting
just use it
firewood.
for cutting wood more than anything
Yeah.
else.
Did that answer your question?
Well, part of it, but you had a shop in Meadows, you had a shop in Cascade, you had one garden out, you had all kinds of logging camps over the years. You set up your own cookhouses. How many, at the peak of the company, how many trucks did you have, Will, and what kind of a payroll went out to the communities? Plus, I think people would be interested in knowing how much land and different things the company donated to this community. And that the sewer ponds, I think we're sitting on property that was given, the company gave to the senior citizens, am I correct?
Yeah, we gave,
What was the peak of the company? How many?
well, I think at one time we were running 40 trucks. And we were employing close to 100 people.
Yeah.
And the payroll probably was close to $3 million in a year. Jack, the sewer pond down here, we did donate land to them. And we also, he built those sewer ponds, and I don't know what kind of an arrangement they worked out, but I'm sure that he did it at fairly good price. There's a couple of letters that I've got from the city over there that are saying, I think they're in one of those books I put over there, this is long overdue, but we appreciate everything that you've done for the city and the land that you've donated to us. And then, of course, we donated the land that the Historical Society's building is on, the old depot. And we donated this land to the senior citizens, and I think Kyle donated the fire department land. So we've done quite a bit along those lines through the years.
New Meadows never had no water, water and soil when they built that.
Yeah, when they first come here,
Had
there wasn't any electricity, they had a power plant.
Yeah, they've had their
Well,
own
well,
power
except-
plant.
Their own power plant was over here, and there's a picture over there of that in the building. And it was two big diesel engines that run electricity, and they drilled a well over here, and they furnished the city with water.
Yeah, we was the first ones that had the city water and sewer and things here.
The
And-
generator was a Morgan generator?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And we did that up until not too many years ago. I lose track of time, but it's probably, then the city drilled their own well. And Jack always said, he told the railroad people, he said, they'd be complaining about something, and he says, I'll shut your water off. And they gotta have water to run a railroad, an engine.
Tell me,
What year was the strike? Was it 1945, Lynn? What year was the strike, in 1945?
Either late 44 or 45, I don't remember when.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's while I was gone to the Navy.
44, I
anyway.
think, because
I
I
went-
got her dad
went
drag
40s.
saw and sawed up a load of wood down there.
That was because of the Boise Lumber Company going on strike.
Yeah.
It was before Jack bought it.
yeah.
And I don't know what that strike was about.
I don't either. Nobody else does, okay?
How long did it last?
Long enough, and I went down and made a couple trips to Pendleton for consolidated trucks, and then was supposed to go to Salt Lake and go to work, but they got the strike settled that day, and so I come back.
Was it just a short time?
Yeah, when, I don't know, what, 2 or 3 months?
Yeah,
But we
I
went back,
wasn't
but
here,
went back with the same money we went out. It was just
Barney or Warren mentioned a little while ago that whatever Boise Payette Lumber Company did, Jack did.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden, Boise Payette Lumber Company on their own, after Jack had bought this, they again started their own logging operation. And whatever they did with the logging operation and all their benefits, we did the same for us, and they reimbursed us for them.
yeah.
They reimbursed the company for them. Then as times change and different people get to be higher up in the company, they look at things like that. They did away with their logging, and we were right in the middle. We were in competition with people that didn't furnish anything. And that's what caused a lot of our union problems.
You mentioned the depot. How did Morgan get a hold of that land?
Well, that was done during the time I was, and they first off come up and called me over there and wanted to know how much we would charge them to tear down the depot, because they said it was a liability.
And when was this?
When was it? It was probably in
478, around there,
around 78.
77,
I was thinking it was up in the 80s, but
That was the Union Pacific? Union Pacific?
yeah, and there was about pretty close to 100 acres over there. And what they had in the contract was a 99-year lease. And so they sent us a letter and said they were going to sell it. Well, what were we going to do? And so we proposed to buy it, and we negotiated with them for quite a long time, and had a lawyer in Boise, Holly Troxel, that helped us with it. He said dealing with the railroad was worse than dealing with the U.S. government. And finally, we did come to an agreement, and we paid for the land, and the depot land was included in it.
So let me get this straight, all that land there, you said it was about 100 acres, and that was what Morgan was leasing
Yeah.
for some of his
Yeah.
operation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the company houses, it was just the railroad property here. They had a train turnaround down here that worked some way
Yeah.
down here. There's quite a bit of acreage that
It's a big
included.
pie.
Yeah, it took a lot of space to,
And then after we purchased that we gave some land to the city for the sewer lagoon down here and so forth.
did Boise Payette, did they buy or own quite a bit of land around the Meadows Valley or between here and Council? And if so, what happened to that? And
They owned the right-of-way for the track.
yeah.
And I read right in that thing where it said that when they discontinued using it, it referred to the property owners of the ranches that it went through. And I don't know what happened there. And of course, they owned this up here, but they didn't own the right-of-way
Yeah.
or they had easements for it that were supposed to just revert to the property owners, and I don't know if that's what happened or not.
But did Boise Payette have timberland around here like they did, I know
Oh,
down
yeah.
in Middle Ford?
Yeah, there's lots and lots of timberland
Yeah,
around here.
what's the status of it now? Does it still belong to whoever bought the rest of their land, or?
Well, 2 years ago, they put a lot of it up for sale,
Yeah.
and in these sales that were here and over at Cascade, and that was one thing that my son and Kyle's son Ole, they purchased about 600 acres of that, and that's something that they've subdivided. They've worked on subdivisions before and so forth, and they have the equipment, so they have subdivided that, but then that's what's happened with a lot of their land. It's being subdivided in different places, and it's causing some problems, like Red Ridge over there. they're gonna subdivide the part that the snowmobiles have been using for years, and now they can't get across it, and so it's a whole new thing.
How many sawmills were in this area? You know, Tamarack's been there forever. And
Well,
were there mills up this way from Tamarack or in the
Well,
valley?
there was one that, of course, there was Brown Tine Lumber in McCall,
Yeah.
and Boise Fed Lumber Company, when Jack took this over, there was one at Emmett, and there was one at Cascade, and Council, and
Cambridge too.
Horseshoe Bend. The Horseshoe Bend one was owned by Hoff Lumber, and Boise Cascade purchased it from them in later years.
What about up this way, Meadows Valley or on up toward Round Valley? You know, Irwin way back had.
Well, yeah, there had to be a lot of logging going on here before any of us.
There were a lot of private mills here. McDevitt had
Small mills.
a fellow by the name of McDevitt, probably Ina's, she can probably remember that too. They had a big sawmill right here where the,
It's on my property there.
Yeah.
It's on Tom Carr's property.
And Dryer had that little bitty one out here.
And then there was
Dryer had that little one out
one up,
yeah,
there was one up the upper end of the valley that Clark owned.
the Ballbacks, they had some
Yeah,
pretty good sized mills here.
But
here
Clark's
years
owned one
ago.
up there on the old Hubbard place.
Mhm.
They had one up there. I don't know, there were several of them, but they were just small mills.
Were they operating when the company come over here?
No,
They were all shut down at that time?
Dryer had a
Oh,
little,
Dryer had
little
one,
sawmill
yeah.
out here.
I bought another one, but Dryer with that little, back garage you can't down there.
Yeah,
His chain, his belt was slipping one time, he had rocks in it, belt tightened, he picked Myrtle up and set her in there so it wouldn't slip so bad to start the blood.
Dryer had one right out here by the highway.
Yeah.
Well, it's past 9 o'clock. We did get some.
I want to tell you something about the Morgan houses. We always call them Morgan houses. Maureen and I moved into one in the summer of 1947, and we lived there and paid rent. We started at $20 a month. It was $18 for rent and $2 for water, and we then eventually we increased and increased, and we lived there. We didn't move out until 1947. And our rent, I think, it finally got up to $100 in all those years.
Moved out.
And they were very nice homes.
Moved out
We all had
95.
beautiful lawns and nice flowers, and we took care of our yards, and we didn't have junk strung all around them, and high fences to keep the kids in, because the kids played out in the road and the street anyway, so.
Did those houses have foundations? Did they put them on cement foundations?
No, they don't have, they have to come in on little skids under them.
Yeah.
And Morgan furnished paint and calcimine. It was calcimine come in a little square package, I think like 5 pounds, and it was powder. And we put it in cold water and mix it and stirred, got all the lumps out of it. And he furnished all of that. It come in white, well, the paint came in white. You could do your own color if you wanted to. But the paint, the calcimine come in yellow and blue and pink, and I did a pale green. And he
Your
furnished
toilet plugged up,
all
if you
of
couldn't fix it, we got a handyman come do it.
that was, when we moved over here, that was just the tail end of the Depression. They were just coming out of that. And all it was logging was company ground at that time. We never, and they figured they had 5 years of timber here, private ground, because they only took just the very choicest pine at that time, and they'd take them up to the first limb, and the rest of it lay there. And they figured we'd only be here 5 years, and then go on down to the timber that McGregor logged around council and things down there. But that's why the houses, none of them have foundations under them. They're only gonna be here for 5 years.
So they would
We're
really
still
just,
here.
they would really just take part of the tree and leave the
Yeah.
limb part.
Up to the slim, they long bottom way up. It hurt me awful bad. I'd picked up cow chips by the wagon loads for fuel back in Nebraska and then see all them big limbs. Ooh, I could have cried sometimes.
The least bit of pitch in the stumps, or the butt of the logs, they just long bottom till it was completely out of pitch. And we'd go out and cut them up for wood, let it cure out.
Yeah, a lot of them they cut springboard.
Yeah.
Ed Morgan said him and Ruth was driving
Yeah.
up Mud Creek one time. They had them big stumps, and she said, "There's them growed that much that they cut them."
Well, those springboards, they just cut a notch in the tree
Yeah, a lot of
on
them.
each side, and the sawyer would stand on that up there 8 feet high and saw the tree off. That's as bad as somebody asked me
handsaw there.
why they watered the logs in the mill, and I said, well, it's to keep them growing.
Do you know if that was dangerous when they'd use those springboards? They'd have a pretty limited movement.
Oh, no,
Sure that they
seem
fell
to-
off of them.
They seem to do it, but
But I mean, as far as when the tree started falling or limbs
Yeah.
coming out.
I don't know what they did.
I don't know, there was a lot of sawyers would rather saw off a springboard because they'd get a rhythm going
Yeah.
and that board would kind of
Yeah.
they had cross-cut saws.
help them
then.
along. Boy, it didn't take them long to cut through a big tree with them.
It's amazing, those saws, the way they kept them sharp, how they would work.
They get to where they file them saws to where they're just
Oh, boy.
sound like they was cutting butter.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I guess
These
that'd
shavings come out of there that long.
that'd be one reason you wouldn't want to deal with limbs, because it'd be quite a job cutting limbs off
Yeah.
They
of
chopped
process.
the limb,
Chop them.
most of them.
Yeah, they had to,
Yeah.
when they had those two-man saws.
Yeah. That's actually why they called them springboards,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
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 that's about the speed they run them hand saws at.
They can hurl the action. Some of them guys could cut timber, I'll tell you.
Any more questions?
I got one question, I think, note the thing about, I was looking at Claus there, about his dad, he was a blacksmith here. So he built all the logging tongs for the company.
Boss's dad?
His dad.
Yeah.
And they was really neat because in the wintertime, you wanted more set in them and everything. You could take them in and tell them, like, you know, and he'd, let's say, you know, got frozen timber and he'd put a set in them so they grab better or, you know, sometimes you break them out a little. And I don't know how many pairs of tongs that he built over the years there, but it was a lot of them.
A lot of them, yeah.
He built all the stake cables for the trucks too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you could really splice cable and
But anyway, every time I think about logging, I think about logging, I think about Claus's dad, you know, building those from just out of a piece of iron. A strip hammer over there, and
I think-
just from basically nothing.
Over here at the shop?
Right there in the shop, yeah.
He was a big man, though. He had wrists about that big.
Yeah, I've got a set of those tongs that I cherish, and I know you got a set.
I got-
But
I got
anyway,
2 of 'em.
the other thing about those tongs, after Newt didn't do it anymore, there was never a set of bottom tongs that would work as well as the ones that he made. And it was amazing. It's too bad somebody didn't take some movies of how he made those, because he just started out with a piece of round iron, and it was special iron. But there was a huge big press over there in the shop. I think it was a 60-ton press. It was a horizontal press. He would bend those tongs, and then he'd put them in the forge, and when they were done, they weren't round, they were flat. He'd flatten them out and put the things on, and then he had a trip hammer. I don't know if people know what that was, but he worked it with his foot, and I think you could have put an egg in there, and he could have cracked it but he'd pound on those. That's how he flattened it, was with this trip hammer. I watched him do it. And another thing that was interesting was he got ill and couldn't be at the office or the shop, and he made these endless cables
Oh, yeah.
that they used on the bull lines for the cats for skidding. You couldn't, there was no cable sticking out of them, they were just a round loop. And I don't think there's anybody who can do that. But anyway, he couldn't be at the shop for a while. And Jack and Middlecoff, who was the shop foreman over there, they tried to make some of those. They didn't know how to do it. Jack said to Nid, he says, "Good God, you're the shop foreman, you ought to know how to do this." And I think Nid said, "Hell, you own the outfit, you ought to." But they wound up taking a piece of cable over to Newt in bed, sick, to find out how he braided these cables.
Where did he learn that?
What?
Where did your
I
dad
don't
learn
know.
that?
I don't know where he learned that. Because,
But that making tongs and those cables was something else to watch him do it.
yeah.
He learned most of it, didn't he, Claus, working on the old donkeys?
Well, I'm sure that, yeah,
He
probably.
did all the cable work,
Yep.
on them old steam
I
donkeys.
think they did all that, a lot of that work right in the woods
Yeah.
when they was working.
How far would they run cables out from a donkey?
Oh, gee whiz.
2,000 or more,
Yeah,
or
1,000
maybe a
feet.
half a mile.
Yeah, a long
And
ways.
drag logs
Yeah.
and that far?
I used to see those old cables laying down there in Round Valley, clear up over a hill. Well, the
Yeah.
cables were that big around.
Somebody said there's still some down.
Well, there
along the
probably
river.
is.
Yeah, in Cascade, there, south of Cascade,
Yeah.
over there, I don't know what that
He-
pond
he
is, but
made
anyway,
all
south
the
of Cascade,
mechanics
there's a knoll
chisels
out there.
and all that
And you can
stuff.
still see
Yeah.
those
Oh,
old
they-
trails.
hard.
where
They really stood
got
up.
those
Yeah,
logs
yeah.
in.
How big were the
He
cables
tempered
for
them and
each little
everything.
Oh,
donkey?
what,
They were probably 2 inches.
Probably.
A lot of.
No.
inch and a half, inch, 2 inches,
How many logs would they drag at a time?
one.
Just one?
Well, they
Are
were
you
big logs.
Yeah, and they'd build them up over hills, and there was nothing to lift the front end up, so
They didn't,
Yeah.
there'd be just troughs where and you can still see those troughs in some of the places where they've made them, that book over there, that ledger. It's called an engine
Yeah.
in that book, and that was an old donkey engine. And an old donkey engine is what we heated that shop with over there for years.
Yeah.
Put coal in it, and they always called a load of coal in there, and we had steam registers in the shop, and for years, I don't know, probably for 15, 20 years, it heated
Yeah.
that.
How would that, was it a circular cable or did they have to drag it out to the log?
it was pulled out,
Yeah.
pulled out.
By hand or with a team probably?
No, I think they probably kind of like the high line, something,
I think they had a tagline that they
tagline that they run out.
drag
there.
up, put it through, pulling a smaller cable,
Oh.
Yeah.
and then they'd pull the big one back out.
But what would they pull it out with?
Well, the same
engine
engine
that pull
that's
it in.
running the thing. It was like a clothesline.
Like a circular.
You,
Oh, yeah.
like a clothesline, you reverse it.
Okay, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the smaller one would pull it back. Huh. Any more questions? You probably better wrap this up. Incidentally, the Council Mountain Music Festival is starting tomorrow evening and it goes all day Saturday, so if you happen to want to listen to some good music, we're gonna have some down there in the park up on Courthouse Hill, Old Courthouse Hill. So that's where I'll be for the next 2 days.
Before we resign for the evening, we owe Will a big thanks for this place right here. He donated the land for us. And I know because I made the first shovel of dirt out here.
That's great.
Yeah, Will's done a lot for this town.
The last year I worked, was hauling from Featherville to Barber, and if you had a scale load, you had to go on the Horseshoe. My first trip, put 2 trips Horseshoe, 15 to 4th hour. Next, I went to bed at 10:15, set the alarm for 12:15, and I woke up 11:45. Both trips to Horseshoe Bend, 19 to 4th hours, but when I got to Horseshoe, I told that girl away, and I said, I'm gonna tell them, take this job and shove it, I ain't gonna work here tomorrow. I said, what's the matter? I said, they promised me a study job, and they laid me off 2 hours last night.
I don't know about all of you, but we wish that we had a lot more time tonight. Don't forget, Nita, if you want to sign up to own this video, or be sure and see Barbara back there for the garden tour. And we thank you all for coming, but most of all,
We have number 6 and number 7 here tonight for the ones that haven't got to number 6 yet.
okay,
And number 7 is brand new.
okay, we have, yeah, the latest ones of our, who was in our last,
Dave,
McGregor.
that's right, Dave McGregor and,
Higgins.
yeah, Yokums and Ballbacks were in the last one, so that one's in now. But anyway, most of all, we want to thank our panelists. We really appreciate them.
I enjoy-
yeah. What year was that?
1927,
Yeah. How old were you when you came to this country?
6 months old.
Really? So you don't remember that very well.
Don't remember that.
And where did your folks live when you came?
First place that I can think of would be Idaho City. And from there, we moved to McGregor.
How old were you when you came to McGregor?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Cabarton was the next place, then
Yeah.
Scott Valley, and then McGregor.
Uh-huh. When we came to Cabarton, how old were you?
Probably about 6
Yeah. And I assume your dad worked for Boise Payette?
at that time, yes.
What was his job?
I don't recollect what it was at that time,
Huh.
but he did run steam donkeys, and then he run or turned into a blacksmith, as far as I know.
Uh-huh. So, where did you go to school? You must have started school at Cabarton.
No, my first grade was in Scott Valley.
Now, where's Scott Valley?
It's about 5, 6 miles east of Cascade.
Yeah.
One-room school.
Yeah. How many kids in the school?
I can't remember, about 8 or 9, I think.
Yeah. Have one teacher, I suppose?
One teacher.
How long were you there at that school?
I was just there 1 year, then we went to McGregor, or Cabarton.
Yeah. So you went to the Cabarton school then, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think I went to school there through my 3rd grade.
Mm-hmm.
Moved to McGregor and went to school there through my 5th grade. Then moved to New Meadows and started my 6th grade here.
Now at McGregor, did they have a school right at McGregor?
Yes.
They didn't move the one from Cabarton, did they, or did they?
No, not that, no, I know they didn't.
Huh. Okay. Then what year was it when you came to New Meadows? Was that about 38, 39, somewhere?
39.
39. Yeah. So
Fall of
how old
39.
were you in 39? You were 12?
13.
13? Okay.
Well, it was 12, I turned 13 at that fall.
And did
November.
you go through high school here?
Oh, I went through, I quit in my last part of my sophomore year, I think, March.
Yeah.
That's the last of my school.
Did you go in the military or go out and start working?
No, I
or-
went to work for a rancher,
Yeah. So after
and then I went to the military. I was turned 18, they drafted me.
yeah, during the war, I guess, huh?
Well, it was after the war.
After the war, yeah. So when you got home from the military, is that when you went into logging yourself? or-
Yes, that's
Yeah.
when I went to work for, at that time, I think it was Morgan,
Yeah.
Jerry Morgan.
Okay, well, let's go to you, Will. What's your story?
Well,
Where were you born?
can't remember.
Too little.
I was born in Cascade,
Yeah,
and I went to school at Cascade, graduated at Cascade,
yeah.
and my grandfather, John Morgan, was with the Boise Payette Lumber Company when they were at Cascade. He was with them when they were, actually it started at Cascade, and it was Weyerhaeuser.
Oh,
And he came here from Minnesota, and his home was in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
And he was a master mechanic he came east with Cross and C.A. Barton, and they landed there at Cascade, and they didn't stay at Cascade very long, and they moved down to Barton. Anyway, that's that part of the history.
So your dad was in on the
Well, it wasn't my dad, it was my grandfather.
Your grandfather, and
Yeah.
he was there when Weyerhaeuser and all those guys formed Boise Payette.
Yeah. Yep.
That's pretty good. So what year were you born?
I was born in 28,
28. Okay, and where'd you go? You say you went through high school at Cascade?
Cascade, that's right.
And what'd you do after high school?
Oh, I grew up on a farm,
Yeah.
and I went to the Korean War for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And when I came back from that, I got a job over here with J.I. Morgan,
Yeah.
52. Actually, I was going to school, when I got out of high school, I worked over here picking up the railroad track
Yeah.
of all the train tracks that run up and down all these draws.
The Shea lines? and
Shea
stuff like
lines.
that?
And we did that with Shay,
Yeah.
a little D4 tractor that picked up the rails and or cut them loose, and then they were unbolted and they were pulled up on a railroad car, and we took them up here to Rubicon and piled them in piles, and they sold them for scrap.
Huh.
McFall run the Shay. I don't know if anybody remembers him, but he was quite a guy. And Pearl Fritzley run the loading thing that pulls the rails up, and Louis Adolph and some others helped undo the track. But I did that in '47, and then I went to college for a couple of years, and then I went to the Korean War. And when I come back from the Korean War, I come to work over here for Jack, and it was 52.
So you say you were pulling up the tracks in '47?
Mm-hmm.
Were they pretty much through with shale logging at that time, or were
Yeah.
they starting to use trucks?
You
pretty
know,
much?
because my grandfather was so connected, and then my Uncle Jack took my grandfather's place when he retired as a master mechanic and equipment superintendent.
Okay, well let's stop there and go on to Warren, and we'll get you all up to the point where you're logging, and then we'll go back and kind of get some stories. Tell us, what year were you born and where?
I was born in 1919,